Hello, everybody. It's Graham Coath with another My Music. It's good to be joining everybody at this time on a Monday morning, 10:32. It's time for a brew. Even I don't know whether you've got one there, Richard.
Mine's already been digested. Thanks very
Oh,
much.
well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to have mine quick, and I'll join you in 2 seconds after this.
I need to get going, Mel. I'll see you later.
Richard, thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thanks
We're here to talk about new album Sentinel, and we'll come back to that in a minute.
Sure.
But what music for you? I mean, obviously, you know, your electronic music, etc. Where did that fascination with all things electronic start for you?
Right. So this goes back to like late 70s, early 80s for me. I was originally a guitarist and quite happy being a guitarist. And then a band I was in, the drummer brought in a synth. I think it was an old Korg to one of the rehearsals. And it just transformed. It was like a little epiphany for me. And I kind of thought, well, I can only, maybe it was my limitations as a guitarist, but felt I could do so much more with the synthesizer. And, from then on, early 80s, that journey began. And I just took to it. And I think, for me, it was maybe the sort of futuristic element to them that I really liked. And, it was really took me off in a different direction musically. So that's kind of where it started. And here we are all this time later.
Yeah. The interesting thing about growing up in that period as well, because that's the period I grew up in.
Right.
I was born in 71, so I don't know how close to it.
A little before that for me, but okay. I know what you mean.
That there wasn't an awful lot of reference point to begin with in terms of synth music. It's not like when musicians say, "Oh yeah, of course, I grew up with these guitar bands or whatever, that I grew up with, my parents playing the Beatles or this." Yeah, of course, there were always, pianos in songs or organs in songs or whatever. But in terms of synth music, of course, that didn't really happen until sort of the late 70s, 80s.
Yeah, and I think it was, so my era at first was punk and new wave. Which you were allowed to be as inventive as you liked in a way, which was really one of the great things about it. But then, when with synth music again, there was so much innovation in that era, which was phenomenal because everybody was kind of learning together, and kind of making it up as you go along in a way. And of course, you had bands like Kraftwerk or Jean-Michel Jarre, who were kind of maybe at the forefront in a lot of ways. But even those guys, now we're lucky we've got computers and MIDI sequences and stuff. But one of the bands I like was the Stranglers, and for some of their albums, they were very electronic and doing stuff on tape reels for sequences and stuff like that. So it was really kind of brave new world in that sort of musical sense for it, I thought.
Yeah. I noticed at school, because we got to play with synths as they started to creep into school. And, initially it was big analog synths with patch boards and everything else. And then, it sort of gravitated to Yamahas and Casios and things like that. There was definitely this duality in terms of what people were listening to. There, on the one hand, there was still the guitar music there in the background. And then on the other hand, there was a group of us that were really, really geeked out on things like Jean-Michel Jarre, etc. And then the more people geeked out, it was like, but but have you heard this? Because this is who Jean-Michel Jarre is listening to.
Yeah,
and then people started bringing in things like Tomatar records and things like that. Yeah. I mean, was that the same for you?
Definitely. And I think it's interesting in that era what happened with the sound of the guitar as well. Because, you know, if you think about maybe bands like The Cure started to use choruses on the guitar, it became almost a more synthesized instrument in some ways. And the sort of maybe what we kind of heard in the 70s with the Stones or the Who or whatever, which was, you know, maybe a more powerful sound, it became more nuanced, which, you know, it's an interesting development, and the way that, you know, bass guitar sounds changed as well. You know, so I think the whole emergence of that instrument has been, for me, transformative for music. And then, you know, what came later with house and so on as well.
And and that's right. I mean, synths actually started getting built into guitars, didn't they? That was the thing. You
That's
know,
right.
if it wasn't, I think we've gone back away from that a little bit now, because at one point everybody had to have a synth guitar in their collection.
That's right.
They were generally awful. There are some good ones out there, but they were generally awful to play. You know, compared with a keyboard, and of course you had keytars as well. You know, everybody suddenly had a keytar.
I think I've got this love-hate view of keytars. I did have one, and I'm just longing for a way that they would look good, or I would look good playing one on stage, but I can't get there. So I'm kind of happy to admire them at a distance. I think it's not I'm not the right musician for a keytar.
So did you have any keyboard heroes growing up? Were there any people that you looked at and went, whoa?
I guess for me it would have to have been Dave Greenfield of the Stranglers, you know, for his musicality, but also I think for a period what he was doing with synth sounds was phenomenal, and kind of blending them into quite a tough punk band, or not punk band, but, you know, aggressive sound that the Stranglers had for a while. I mean, they became more nuanced over time. I loved what Jarre was doing as well, and, you know, Kraftwerk, people like that. But again, you know, what was the Vangelis did the Blade Runner soundtrack in 82, 81, 82, and it still stands up today. It's, you know, phenomenal music. But I guess, I suppose with all of those people, the musicality came through, their sense of songwriting, you know, because I think it's not just about sounds, it's how you use the sounds, you know, and are you making something, you know, even now you want to kind of make stuff that's hopefully sounds original, you know, and takes the genre or the instruments in a slightly new direction somehow. But that's, you know, I think you're always kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, really, aren't you? That's the thing. But the challenge is, how do you kind of go forward and not just try to emulate, but how do you go forward somehow?
I think the other thing with electronic music is it took that kind of level of geekiness to a completely new level.
Yeah, it became okay, didn't it?
Whereas, you know, with a guitar, yes, you know, guitarists would have always, you know, fiddled with gear to try and get that, you know, tone right, or to get that, you know, let's get that distortion right through, you know, in terms of the amp and the pedal or whatever. You know, and actually pedals were really only beginning to take off as well because of the electronic side of things. But so, you know, up until then it was like, you know, do you go for like clean, or do you, you know, are you using the valves or whatever? You know, but then suddenly, as you say, guitars had all of that different level. But certainly with electronic music, there was that level of, well, how I just want to fiddle with this sound a little bit more, and it's just got to have a little bit more of that, etc. And then we started getting into sequencing and sampling as well. And that just blew everybody's minds. It was like, okay,
oh man,
you know, I'm going to sample that.
I've got a choir now on my keyboard. That was, for me, whoa, you know, fabulous stuff.
Once we started sampling voices, that was just
And I do think synth players get a slightly unfair rap, because I've known guitarists, I've known drummers that are as pernickety and geeky about the sound as any synth player, but I think it is that thing, you stood behind an object playing it, kind of, guitarists have always got that thing where they can strut about, and it's a more expressive performance automatically with the guitar, isn't it? But I think they're as fussy as the rest of us.
Do you think part of the reason that we saw such an explosion as well was the fact that a lot of producers were actually beginning to turn their attention at that time to the electronic sounds and what could be done with it? I was thinking about people like Trevor Horn, for example, who had done, had done sort of band type records, traditional band type records, but suddenly, let loose. And we even had like the project Art of Noise, etc. With Anne Dudley. All of those noises, and suddenly they started to permeate into other bands' music.
I think definitely. I think it also is interesting, how that, because production has become much more technical, almost to the point that virtually all music is in some sense electronic now, because just how it's recorded. But I knew stories from the 80s of a certain heavy metal band whose name I won't mention, recording their guitar parts one string at a time, and that was kind of quite shocking, spending 20 grand on getting the snare drum sound right, because of what the producer, the drummer wants. So I think it allowed you, and does still allow you, to become so obsessive, to really go to the finest details of the sound you want to make. But I still think the important thing is the song, and that you're always got to remember that you're writing and producing for the song. And I guess it was something that frustrated me slightly being in bands sometimes, that everyone wants to have their say, but actually it doesn't matter what the keyboard parts are, that the bass parts are, in a way, as long as they're right for the song. And that's what we're all trying to work towards, not our own little egos, that I've got to have my bit and they've got to have their bit. So I think, it was a hugely transformative time, really, thinking back and in this discussion, because maybe it shifted the power somewhat as well to the producers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you began to see, artists emerging who were producers as well. They were as much producers as they were artists.
Definitely,
and I think, thinking about my sort of record collection as I sort of grew up through the 80s, I mean, people for me that were quite influential were people like Nick Kershaw, who could play guitar, write, play keyboards, etc. But it was as much about the way he produced. That was quite instrumental in he had a very distinct sound. He had
definitely. He came through around the same time as Howard Jones, didn't he?
Correct.
Which was always I don't know,
bit of a rivalry. It's the rivalry of the haircuts.
That's
one
right.
Of them lost his hair.
But again, Howard Jones, another amazing musician. He was classically trained pianist, and but that came through, I think, into the music he put out as well. So you can't get away from the song, I think, and the musicality you have to have, for me anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just think I think that whole period and getting into, as I say, getting into electronica, it's fascinating. Did you used to do all of the or read all of the magazines as well? Because suddenly all of these different magazines appeared, sort of like electronic music and electric sounds and all of that. Fascinating. They were just like geek porn, really. It was like, oh, look at this this new
Oh, it's terrible. It's brutal.
amplifier that you've got to, you've got to buy.
Yeah.
You've got to buy this, or you've got to buy this new keyboard, and it will do this.
Even now, I try and stop myself from reading too much websites or magazines like that, because I know that I'll go, well, actually, I do need that new synthesizer that someone's just brought out. It does give me something that I've never had before. But, in reality is we're so spoiled these days with, even plugins now. I'm trying to use hardware synths as well in the show, because I don't think there's any substitute for them, especially live. But yeah, plugins, man, we're spoiled these days.
Yeah, well, that was, I suppose, along the route as well. That was something that really started to change the life of any musician that plays keyboards. Was the fact that we then would go to computers. And we go to VAs, we go to virtual instrument. Oh, sorry, for VIs, we go to virtual instruments. Because the fact is, it's actually only in fairly relatively recent history that you didn't have to take millions of keyboards with you on tour.
Yeah, I know. We try and sort of do a blend of live instruments with pre-recorded tracks. But yeah, it's even that, with little sound modules, you can have a fairly light touring kit these days. So that's the whole thing's transformative, but then it's how you replicate it on stage, isn't it? Is the other challenge.
Yeah. And it's how you make it entertaining. How do you make it entertaining live, both for you and for the crowd?
For me, it's always kind of like a balancing act, I would say. We still have this, 95% everything will work fine, and then you have a little something that will throw you a curveball on the day. But we do. The Sentinel live show is full of visuals. It's sort of music and video, data visualizations, everything synced to the music. So we try. So I work with two guys live, Joel Clements and Tarek Wilkes, and we try to sort of make. None of the shows we've done so far have been the same as the previous one, because Joel, as the VJ's got the freedom to mix the visuals a different way. We can change things with the sounds. I'm forever, much to their annoyance, forever tinkering with the I just want to do this to one of the songs this time. So I try and not overdo that, because we try and rehearse the thing. So it's that mix of music and visuals is what keeps it fresh, and isn't just me playing to backing tracks. We try and have live bass, synth, and I've got a couple of synths that I play as well. So there's 3 or 4 live instruments going on during the show, as well as the vocals. So it does. I think that and then the active performance keeps it fresh so far, anyway.
Yeah. No, it could still mess up. That's the thing. As
long
as it's not a recording and you're just standing there, you could make mistakes, and that
absolutely, and I do.
But that's what people
live.
come for, in a way. Yeah.
Otherwise, you just you can tell when you're connecting with the crowd. I think that's the key thing, and the onus is on you then as the performer and the musician to make that connection. Because that's what otherwise they can stay at home and listen to something on the radio.
So Sentinel's the album. What inspired you to call it Sentinel? Why the space thing?
So the space thing comes from so the whole thing's themed around climate change, and the European Space Agency has a fleet of satellites called the Sentinel program that look at how climate change is affecting the Earth. And I kind of thought, when I read the meaning of the word sentinel, which means to watch over and protect, I kind of thought that's felt right for the album, and almost in my view what we need to become as the custodians of this planet, if you like. That's our role, to try and do something to mitigate the sort of damage. But then one of the songs within the album is called Trick Machine, and it's actually a little narrative about an astronaut on board this imaginary Sentinel spacecraft, and he's trying to communicate with Earth, but no one is responding to him. And he thinks it's his machines that have gone wrong instead of where have all the people gone down below. So that's that. I kind of took that one off into a little narrative, imaginary story.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So why is he thinking that?
Well, it was an interesting thing during COVID. So as we all stayed at home in our global lockdown scenario, the scientists discovered that the sounds that our cities make were diminished because people weren't there anymore. So the cities across the planet were becoming, more and more silent. So it just intrigued me as a concept, that idea of where have all the people gone? And there is one of the outcomes from climate change, if it goes on and on and on, it's threatening to us. It is an existential thing if we don't get our acts together. So, I kind of think it was one of those things where I want to put some entertainment and imagination into this. The album's not about me ranting or giving a lecture. It's a creative response to these times that we're in.
Yes.
So yeah, that's where that came from.
How much do you feel it is the responsibility of people in the arts to actually be a voice now for global change? I mean, arts have always been a massive voice for global change. So let's think about something that happened when we grew up, which was Live Aid and all of that. It was whether it was naive or not at the time. We all in that moment with Freddie thought we were changing the world.
Yes,
and it was an important solidarity and an important communal moment.
That's exactly right, because it's the thing of music, one of the art forms that can unite people. It moves us in ways that maybe another art form doesn't, and I think there has to be that aspirational voice somewhere. And I'm not saying that's me. I mean, that's other artists, because especially now everything's so hard. We've had the pandemic as well, and we're all a bit jaded and we're all a bit divided, aren't we? And it's probably all fed up of each other in some way or other. It's that but there has to be something somewhere that starts to bring people together again, because otherwise it becomes overwhelming. And where do we go if we just carry on falling out with each other? It's a bit of a dead end, really. And I think Live Aid's a great example of something that deals with a serious issue or draws attention to a serious issue, but unites people as well. And we can be cynical about it, but there was a moment there that did work and did bring people together, undoubtedly. So I think that's maybe a challenge for us all to kind of reach that bar in a way.
Yeah, I think it's there was definitely a spiritual moment there. There was definitely a moment that brought the planet to a standstill and made them think. And I think we had that again in the middle of the pandemic with lockdown. I think we did have that. I think we saw moments of that again.
Yes, definitely.
I think we saw moments when people were out on the streets clapping for the NHS, etc. There were those moments where life stopped.
Yeah.
And we centered our attention on something that was bigger than just our day-to-day lives.
Definitely.
And it's really, that's the challenge, isn't it? Now is how do we turn that into something tangible, and how do we make sure that continues to happen again and again?
Yeah, and especially for me, a subject like climate change, it's so easy to be, it's all terrible, and it's really, really serious. And by no means, I've done an album and a show about it. I'm not trivializing it, but at some stage we have to find it within ourselves to actually meet the challenge, if you like. And like you say, that thing during lockdown with people here supporting the NHS, and there were real moments of community mindedness as people looking out for their neighbours and relatives and so on. And that despite all of the terrible backdrop, that we were.
Do you think some of that is about it is actually trying to put aside people's differences on things, really, to some extent? Because
we've got to, haven't we? Because I kind of, here in the UK, we're living through this whole Brexit thing, and that's another big divider. We've got this, whatever you think of the government, maybe they've not always made the smartest decisions. We're a very sort of polarized country here, and I think the same in the US as well, with what those guys have lived through. But most of us want to just get on and live our lives and have peaceful lives and do our work and get on with family and friends. So it's kind of, where's the common ground, I suppose, is that
part of the problem, though? I don't want this to turn into a completely political thing.
Let's go. Good.
Is that part of the problem? Is that most of us want to just have that normal? It's about us. It's about our microcosm of what's going on in the world, and actually, is that in a way part of the problem? Because actually, to deal with these big issues we've actually kind of got to stop being a bit selfish. We've actually got to say, actually, although I might just want to have, wife, kids, a couple of holidays a year, a car, etc. I might actually have to say, stop for a minute and go, actually, what's the bigger thing here? And I might actually need to give up some of my time, and I might actually need to give up some of the other things that I want, because otherwise this isn't going to happen.
I think, I think you're right there, but I think it's also finding other ways to do these things. So obviously, like, electric cars have come in. They're hugely expensive at the moment, and that's prohibitive for a lot of people. So I think it's, as a society, and maybe government needs to get involved with this, how do we make those technologies accessible and affordable for everybody? Because the bigger picture here is we're going to be, losing our cities on coastlines. We're going to be indigenous people around the world losing their land and where they live. There's a global problem that needs a global solution. And there were examples of countries working together through the pandemic. And I think the same thing, we had the COP26 a few months ago in Glasgow, and lots of people made the right noises, but actually it's not just doing the sound bites, it's what do we do? How can we, as individuals, there are things we can do, little sacrifices, but it's holding our governments to account and corporations as well, because otherwise they'll just make their money and stuff the rest of us, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So,
I take it back to when I was a child again. I can remember doing things like meeting round at someone's house as a group of young people and having a tea where we all sat there. One set of two people were picked out of a hat, and they had to sit in the middle of us and eat a full dinner, and the rest of us got salted rice in a bowl, and had to watch these two people in the middle have a really nice meal. And the whole point is, but you all put the same amount of money in. It was to raise money for people in the third world that weren't eating a proper meal. But it was visually really quite stimulating. It sticks with you. And I just feel that as a child, we kept trying to have, right or wrong, we kept trying to have these experiences where we try to be empathetic and try to put ourselves in other people's shoes, and then we had all of these big things, like we had Live Aid, we had the free Nelson Mandela concert,
Rock Against Racism,
Rock Against Racism, all of them.
All that.
We had all of those things, and I just wonder, with everything now being on the internet, whether we've kind of lost a little bit of momentum in that kind of global pulling together, in that physically we actually physically had to do it back then, and now we can just kind of watch it.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because this stuff supposedly connects us like never before, but there does seem to be that thing you can live in your own bubble with the internet and social media and everything, and it is.
It's where have all the people gone again?
Well, because in a social sense, there seems to be like a lot of anxiety these days for young people that are coming through, and is that without wishing to sound too middle-aged, is that a consequence of some of the sort of the lack of engagement maybe you get through not actually being with people and being with your friends and becoming socialized in a different way? And I don't know. I think there's clearly something there, isn't there? That we've got these amazing technologies, but we're not as connected and as empathetic with each other as perhaps we could be. And how are we either allowing those technologies to drive our behavior instead of the other way around? We drive, they're doing things for us, not we're following whatever algorithm Facebook puts out to say who we should talk to or what we should read on our feeds about maybe ideas that aren't very scientific or are in some way corrupting or not to an individual's best best outcomes.
Bringing it back to the music, I mean, I know most artists will want their art to be interpreted, so they don't necessarily want to put this is how you should read this, etc. But is there something that you would like people to take away from this album and this live show?
Wow, that's a great question. I think it is maybe something around a different look at the. I think the dog has said it far better than I could have. I couldn't agree more, really.
And that's a dishwasher turning up. So.
Is that right?
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. I love it. I love stuff like that. I'll sample that and I'll use it in a song.
Richard, thanks for joining me today. I better leave it there because I've got to get that dishwasher. But it's been a pleasure meeting you.
And you.
We'll speak again soon.
Thank you so much for the questions. It was terrific.
Cheers. Thank you.
Take care. Bye everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.